Hello? This time we'll finish these thoughts about this book, Talking to Terrorists. This part here is a departure. This piece here is a departure from most of the rest of the book. The first 4/5 of the text are her interviewing terrorists, her going and talking to people who have been affected by terrorism, her talking with folk who are trying to turn kids away from the path of terrorism, and so on and so on. But at the end here, it says, it's Halloween 2006. I've accepted an invitation to participate in the U.S. Department of Defense-sponsored conference countering ideological support for terrorism, held at an Air Force facility in San Antonio, Texas. I've flown in from Belgium. So the author's an American. She's an intellectual. She's a university professor. And she gets involved with these Americans, essentially, right? And she has some interesting words to say. She says, when the participants are allowed more than one word for their remarks, and remember, she's at a conference held by the U.S. Department of Defense, I noticed that most seem to have little grasp of the real issues at hand. They stick to catchphrases, assuming all terrorism is related to Islam, and don't seem to have any idea of the frustrated aspirations, imprisonment, torture, killings, and other types of violence that would-be terrorists from Muslim countries often endure and witness within conflict zones. Violence that has to do with their corrupt and hardened regimes, not with Islam per se. And no one hearkens to the blocked opportunities, oppression, social marginalization, and discrimination that others face in non-conflict zones. So what she's saying is interesting. Like I, as an American, especially, someone growing up as a kid, as a child during all of this, it makes you worry. It doesn't make you feel safe, I can tell you that much. When you hear some intellectual talking about the American defense system, and they're like, well, the American military, at least as far as she puts it here, it's just like, well, these terrorists are Islamic, and so it must be something in the religion. I don't know, it's something in the water. And she's like saying, no, you have to look at the society they come from. That is the intellectual basis for their claims is not the same as the emotional and economic and real basis for their claims of when they act in a certain way. If you just look at Islamic terrorists and go, well, they're terrorists and they're all Islamic, and so that's bad, without understanding that, oh no, we're looking at Islamic terrorists, and they happen to be Afghani terrorists, and Saudi Arabian terrorists, and Iraqi terrorists, and Iranian terrorists, and Palestinian terrorists, and Egyptian terrorists, and Sudanese terrorists, and you have a terrorist who's Moroccan in Belgium, and then who's Syrian in London, who's Palestinian in Israel, sort of bit. And you go, okay, so you have large differences. And it's interesting because it harkens back to a claim that is pushing in the other direction, right? That she was talking just last time with somebody in London who was saying that kids get radicalized in London, and then they get wrapped into the global jihadi idealism, and then they'll go off to the Middle East to fight. And then you're saying, okay, wait. So how do you categorize an Islamic terrorist who is of Moroccan descent but lives in Belgium and has traveled to Iraq? Right? Like, it's not just that is looking as if it's the religion that's important there. It doesn't look like it's just the whole culture or the history, because you're going, okay, we traveled through like 3 different countries to get here. You grew up in London. Why are you in the middle of Afghanistan shooting Americans. So you had this back and forth push between, you have a global power and a global movement and a terrorism that attacks all the West and all the East and all the Middle East and all of Africa and bits like that. But you also have individuals who are suffering and have mental problems, and you have also groups that form, say tribes. You know, in the southern part of Afghanistan, there's a tribe. In the northern part, there's a different tribe. In the mountains, there's a tribe. Around the eastern part, there's a tribe, and they're actually related to another tribe that's in Pakistan, but also those related to another tribe that's in like some other area, and it gets all complicated. I don't pretend to think that I know even a fifth of the histories that I'm talking about. I'm just like, I'm muttering and mentioning things that I've heard and which are bits and pieces of information that have stuck in my head that may or may not be valid. And I could, of course, dive into this and become an expert and get my master's and my PhD. And I think that would gain me a lot of knowledge about exactly what's going on here, so I could sort of filter out the information and avoid applying my own extreme biases to it. But if I do that, I would also, I feel, lose sight of the grander picture. So you have it's just the issue of knowing anything about anything, right? The more how specific do you get, how general do you get, how do you understand it being complex and related to history and related to government activities across hundreds of years and thousands of miles. Okay, in 2006, de-radicalization programs are still fairly new and mostly confined to prison settings. So she's talked to by a colonel here. The colonel nods. The U.S. Department of Defense wants to make a de-radicalization program in Iraq. Would you be willing to help? Yes, of course, I answered. And she manages to join them. So she's contracted by the U.S. Department of Defense to travel to Iraq and write a de-radicalization program. So the issue is that the Americans have gone to Iraq. They have captured a bunch of people who they think are terrorists or might be supportive of terrorism, or might just be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And they got thousands of these folk stuck in a jail, stuck in an open air prison or something like this, covered with armed guards. And they're going, what on earth do we do with all these people? How do we sort through and release the folk who just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time? How do we go through and find the ones who are radical terrorists and stop them now? And can we work with the people who are under our control at this moment and de-radicalize them, turn them away from terrorism? Because obviously if you let them loose, then you'll just have terrorism starting up again. And you have, of course, the problem that someone may lie and say, I promise not to be a terrorist, and they go ahead and do it. We see this later where there's a breakdown of trust. Anyway, she talks about this, and it doesn't go great, let's say. So she gets to Iraq. She's in Camp Cropper, where the majority of the hardcore Takfiri prisoners are held, and she goes to interview a few of them. She's not in charge of this interview. There's someone named Rohan is in charge of it. And this person who is running the interrogation is very direct. And he wants to know, who are you? Where did you come from? Why are you here? Who gave you the bomb? What do you know about their plans? You know, it's an interrogation that she's sitting in. She begins to realize. And she, as a psychologist who goes to these places to interview people, has a very different approach. It's a more familiar, heartfelt, honest approach. You know, it's more about trying to understand the person. She's a psychologist, not an interrogator. Okay, so she is talking with someone, and this detainee, this person being interrogated, starts to explain some of the complications. So the person being interrogated says that he isn't himself in support of terrorism, but his brother is. He says, "My brother, I don't know." The detainee laughs cynically. "He's in your hands. I can't tell. He never convinced me. I didn't have any connection with them. I used to advise him and say, this is not good for you, but my brother got persuaded." "He saw terrible things?" I ask. "Yes," the detainee answers, suddenly frowning deeply. "Many people in my family were killed by Shia. It's not Americans, it's from Iran." We go on to discuss the sectarian fighting in Iraq and his brother's involvement in fighting the Shia. "How do you feel about being detained by Americans?" I ask. "My feelings are hurt," he admits, his voice petulant and full of emotion. "I missed my university graduation because I'm here, but we have no problems with Americans." "Do you know how your family is doing while you are here?" I ask. "My wife is all alone," he answers. "I'm worried about her because the situation is troublesome. She doesn't work. My mother's employed as an elementary school teacher, but the school is closed. She has 4 sons, but only one is at home. I want to go home. Do you want revenge?" "No, I don't want revenge." The investigator here promised there's no evidence for charges against me. "I want to know my future," he says, referring to the indefiniteness of his detainment and lack of charges against him. So we see several things in this short phrasing here. First, you see that terrorism doesn't, just because someone's a terrorist doesn't mean that their family member is a terrorist. But you also have, like, say your brother is a terrorist. How do you resolve that action? How do you resolve those feelings? If your brother is killed being a terrorist, do you look at it and go, "Oh my gosh, my brother's killed, I must take revenge"? Do you grow angry, or do you go, "My brother asked for that. What did you think? What do you think he was doing? I told him not to do it." Right? How involved do you be if your brother is running from the Americans someday, knocks in the home of on your house and says, "Please hide me. The Americans are after me because I blew up and killed 14 people." Do you hide him because he's your brother? Do you turn him in and make your entire family dislike you? Like, what are the complexities of morality going on here? Secondly, he's saying, "Many people in my family were killed by Shia. It's an Americans. It's from Iran." So this is going to pop up later, but there's several, actually, I know several differences, several different sects in Islam, but the 2 major differences are Shia and Sunni, which has to do with, like, which person they think is the legitimate inheritor of Muhammad. Who is the righteous person. And it also has to do with the differences between like Persians and Arabians, historically speaking, who they chose to decide to see as the next ruler and so on. And I don't really know all that much about it. I read a book a long time ago, but got into it. It was basically Muhammad kind of messed up by not saying, "Hey, it looks like I'm going to die. Let me tell you who's going to be in charge next." And it ended up being a fight between, like, family members and followers. A giant mess. But you see here, now we got Shia versus Sunni, and now he's in Iraq and they're fighting from Iran. Like, there was a long period of war between Iran and Iraq, and that it influences what's going on today. And he says he doesn't. How do they feel about the Americans? Like, the idea you have that he's saying here is that he doesn't think the Americans are evil or bad. That he has hoped the Americans will be right and just. The Americans have a reputation to uphold, as talked about here, right? He says, "I want to know my future." Why? Because the Americans are detaining him without telling him how long he's going to be in there, without giving him a number, a name, an hour, a date. And this slowly builds up a ring of hate, I would imagine, right? Who am I? Why am I here? I want to leave. I want to leave. I want to know things. I want to be treated better. And the Americans, of course, are in a bit of a rough spot. Okay, do we let him go because he's good, or he's telling the truth, or he's not involved in this, or is he lying, or is he hiding? Like, you know, if we do let him go, where does he go? Is he going to become involved in the fighting somehow? Do we try to make him an informant in some way? Do we want to give him a job? Is there a place for him? You know, and how do we distinguish what's going on here? Nobody really knows, because the Americans entered Iraq, as far as I can tell, with half of a half-assed plan about what on earth to do. And meanwhile, this guy's locked up. He can't go home to his family. His family doesn't know what's happening to him. There's kids and brothers and sons missing all over the place. Nobody knows what's happening. It's a rough area. It's a rough time. And then the problem, of course, is that the Americans are working with the Iraqi government, who was the Iraqi government of Saddam Hussein. Like, you know, the civil sector is still there. The old police are still there. The old military are still there, because if you just simply disband them, and you have a bunch of, you know, you have tens of thousands of folk out of a job now. You have sectarian and tribal infighting going on. You have revenge killings. But as you work with the old system, work with the old Iraqi police, because they sort of know what's going on, they already have a system in place, you get things like this. I've been here for 2 months and 2 days, the next detainee tells me after seating himself in the chair beside me. I was at home when picked up by the Iraqi police. They said, "We take you for questions." The Iraqis hurt me and tortured me with electricity. They blindfolded me and tied my hands behind me. They beat me with a rubber hose. They fractured my leg. They hurt me a lot. They hit my head. They cursed me. They tortured me for 5 hours to get me to confess, but I can't confess to anything I haven't done. I fainted and lost consciousness finally and woke up in U.S. custody. Maybe they gave me to the U.S. forces, or the Americans saw and came and took me. I don't know. He showed us an open wound on his leg. So now you will enter in as the Americans, and you're identified with the Iraqi police who torture people. Why? Because that's what they've been doing for the last 40 years. That's the system they have for how they work. And it's not like they're evil or bad or hateful. It's just that, hey, you are working for a repressive regime. That's how it works. It's the system of terror and torture and making sure that the peon knows who's the boss. Right? This kid says, "I have nightmares all the time. I keep hearing my mom calling, asking me, 'Why did you leave us? Why did you leave us with no food?' When I was arrested, she was there, and she became hysterical and fainted on the ground. I can't forget my mom." His eyes widen with terror and fill with tears. "Have you been able to call them from prison to let her know you are alive?" I ask. "There's no phone at home," he says. They're in Fallujah, which is the area of heaviest insurgency and fighting inside Iraq. A place where you cannot even be sure they are alive, much less with electricity or phone services. I hand him a tissue and he sits silently as he cries unabashedly. You know, this kid isn't involved in terrorism, but you can see how he could be. Imagine he gets out 5 months later. The Americans let him go. "Oh, we didn't actually have any charges against you. We didn't know why you were held. We're sorry about the bad treatment you might have received, but good luck, goodbye." So he heads cross country, trying to get home, begging for rides, hitchhiking, walking 10 miles, or begging for money or food for a train or a plane. Gets home. His house is in ruins. Half his neighbors are dead. He's running around for weeks trying to find his family. He finally runs into them. His mom is alive, but his brother was killed in the fighting. Now what happens to this guy? the stress, the anger, the worry, the idea that, oh my gosh, the Americans did this. Why? Because he had an okay life before. Maybe he got picked up by the police. Maybe there was repression, but his life mostly worked. He had a job. He had a family. He had a house. His parents, and the Americans came. They worked with the Iraqi police who beat him, and they threw him in jail. And then he didn't know what was going on, and they regarded him with suspicion. Then he gets kicked out, told that they never had any good reason to keep him anyway. He manages to go through this war-torn country, gets home, and it's gone. People know he's dead. Like the stress, the trauma that is inflicted upon this kid. And then as the years go by, he sees, oh, we don't have self-rule. Oh, life isn't getting any better. And you can end up wanting to do something, right? You're like, hey, what if he doesn't get a job? What if he can't get a living? Well, maybe he can join the insurgency. Maybe they can give him food, right? If you're in enough trouble, you go to anyone who promises to help you, or even just promises to make life better for you. Even just promises to acknowledge that you are in pain and you are hurt. So he's not a terrorist right now, but you could see how he could become one, because he's angry, he doesn't know what to do, and then the Americans have come and ruined his life. Or maybe he's picked up, the Americans let him go. He gets home, his home's still there, his family's still there. He gets a tearful reunion, tearful happy reunion. He finally manages to find a job somewhere, and the Iraqi civilization reflourishes. So in that situation, does he become a terrorist? It's much less likely, because he has a job, he has a family, his country is doing well. What reason does he have to attack the Americans? Yeah, they put him in jail, and that sucks, but that's war, and that's the terrible thing that's happened. And they've given him money, or they've had psychologists to look after him. You never know. Like, how do you treat prisoners can have massive effects for how they look at you years and decades after. Right. Okay. I mean, listen, this is what the Americans are doing in Iraq. This is what my country is doing in Iraq. A discussion ensues in which the military advisors admit that they often don't even know the religious affiliation of their inmates, much less if they are violent extremists or simply minor operators or even innocent civilians picked up in sweeps, because the detainees tend to lie so much out of fear of their captors and especially terror of the other inmates. Right? We don't even know who we picked up. We went into the country and blew it up and said, well, you look like you're a terrorist. I'm laughing because what else do you do? Except look at the absurdity of it. The wonderful plan and high level of incompetence we had for nation building. Okay, then she manages to talk with people who are prisoners. They are imams who have decided to reject terrorist ideas because of religious ordinances. Basically they say that you can fight militarily, but like the Quran does not allow you to attack civilians. To extremely simplify the statement being given here, but And she says she's trying to get these imams who have converted to nonviolence, converted against terrorism, to get them involved in her de-radicalization program, because she's saying, look, I'm dealing with another culture, at a bunch of people with a whole religious system, and she points out, the terrorists in Iraq she's trying to deal with are both you have psychological reasons for getting into terrorism, you have socio-political reasons for getting into terrorism, and you have religious reasons for getting into terrorism. So you can fix the socio-political reasons for getting into terrorism by changing the politics of the country. You can fix this, you can work on the psychological reasons for getting into terrorism by healing some of the trauma. And that leaves you with the religious reasons for getting into terrorism, which you have to fight through religious means. And I mean, this is the person who's writing this is a white female American. Good luck doing religious conversion to a radical male Iraqi terrorist, Islamic terrorist. No, you're going to need someone from the culture. You're going to need someone who has religious authority. You're going to need an imam or a priest of some sort, because terrorism is the terrorism she's trying to deal with in Iraq is a multifaceted problem. Right? Giving up the ideology can return the person to a state of powerlessness, despair, and hopelessness, and deep guilt if he's committed crimes. When we challenge those beliefs, we have to find something that also imparts a sense of purpose and self-righteousness to replace what we are taking apart. So if you show someone that they've done something bad, or you bring in a religious teacher to show them they've done something bad, and you convince them of that, then you have the extra problem. Now, the person says, I have done bad things. And when someone thinks I have done bad things, I am a bad person, then you need to give them an outlet. You need to say, you were bad, but you can be good in this way. You were bad, but it was not your fault. You were bad, but you can make up for it. Otherwise, they're just bad, right? And they don't have any escape outlet for the pressure, and they explode again. And they're vulnerable again to some terrorist ideology, which acts as a sort of psychological release valve, or a moral bandage. Again, if someone is wounded and you tear off the bandage, which maybe the bandage is made of poison, but it's stopping the bleeding. Well, now the wound is bleeding again. They're not poisoned. They don't have the religious terrorist ideology in them, but now you got to replace it with some religious non-terrorist ideology, which is, I've been talking about that as hope, right? You have to give people hope that life can get better, that they can do something in order to change their situation. So she talks to a general here. If we go forward with this program, I'd suggest using these 3 imams we met last night. I think they can play a very powerful role in our initiative. They have the charisma and the knowledge and the experience to reach even the hardcore. The general is open to the idea, but I can see that there are strong reservations in the room. These 3 were inside Al-Qaeda after all. To me, that is the strongest reason to use them, but I can understand the caution on the part of the military. And this is going to be an issue that comes up. Right? If you are going into a situation and you are reliant on former enemies to help you, then it's very delicate. Do you treat them as enemies? Do you treat them as trusted enemies? Do you treat them as friends? Do you treat them as contractors? Like, how far do you trust these people who were your enemies? Do you believe their conversion, or do you think that they're secretly fighting against you? do you set a guard on them at all times? Do they have to ask permission to go to the bathroom? Like, how much of a prisoner are they? Or do you give them free reign to travel throughout the country or the base to see whatever they want to see? Like, how far do you trust someone's conversion? Because you have to, you've decided to work with them. You say, I need you to work with me. I think that you were terrorists, but now you are not terrorists anymore. And this is hard to work with. It's one of those issues. If you are working with a country and it turns out there's terrorism in the country, then eventually the terrorists overthrow the government. Are they now former terrorists? Do you now work with the whoever leads it, like Syria or the Taliban in Afghanistan? Do you work with them as a state now? Just as practical means and practical matters, or do you regard them still as a terrorist? Well, you were a terrorist, so you must be a terrorist forever. How can someone renounce terrorism? Do they renounce terrorism? Do you look at the actions that they have done, or do you assume? Do you trust but verify? Like, you have all sorts of complications here. The military is very cautious. I think they end up being too cautious and too untrusting. But again, I'm reading this third hand. I'm getting this information third hand. Fourth hand, almost. So the interviews we do are interesting, but more of the same. Nearly all the prisoners refer to their arrest by American soldiers as brutal, with beatings and rough treatment during interrogations. They all reference how hard it is to be in prison, separated from our homes, our wives, our children, our work. Well, it continues, I don't even know what I'm accused of. Some of the detainees had been in the prison for over 3 years without charges, and many of the young men had just been married or their marriage plans were disrupted, and frequently the girl they had hoped to marry was married off to some other man in their absence, which obviously here shows some, oh God, it's, look, some of the detainees have been in the prison for over 3 years without charges. Seriously? I'm going to pick you up, not even accuse you of anything. Just think that you might be a terrorist in some way. Lock you up for 3 years. I mean, it's just did the Americans not have the resources to do this? To interview folk? Did the Americans not have a system in place? Were they using old Iraqi prisons? I mean, do we not have enough manpower, or did we just not care? Was this a program? Was the prisoners we kept for 3 years without charges done for practical means? Would we focus on something else? I mean, what's the point of this? The question becomes, how much do you damage yourself by acting in an unlawful manner? I don't really mean against the letter of the law, because you can always write a letter of the law saying we can detain you indefinitely if we're suspected of terrorism. You can find some legal mechanism for doing almost anything you want. But it's the spirit of the law. It's the idea of justice. It is the heart of the American penal system, right? You had the ability to face your accuser. You have the ability to know what you are charged for. You have the ability to defend yourself. And when you, like, we give that to citizens, not because they are citizens, but because we have recognized that doing otherwise just ends up creating more problems than it is worth. Right? The Constitution of the United States was not written primarily to ensure that, the citizens have these rights naturally. No, it was because the citizens demanded these rights. Because the states said, we will not agree to the Constitution without these rights in place, without these protections in place. And why? Because the British did not follow these rules. The British did not give the Americans free speech. The British would quarter troops. The British would pick up people and throw them in jail without charges. The British would act essentially like colonial overlords. And when Americans go in and do the same thing, we become the British and engender the same problem. But it's just like, this is how you make people terrorists. This is how you make people hate you. Stick them in prison for 3 years, beat them once in a while, barely feed them. Don't tell them why they're there. And you run the risk, of course, of letting a terrorist out prematurely. But you also run the risk of radicalizing someone and making them attack you in 20 years. How do you balance these back and forth rules or needs or suspicions? Right? Like I'm an idealist. Obviously, I've got a philosophy degree. And I'm talking to a camera for hours about terrorism that I haven't really encountered or understand. So there's stuff in here that I just will not understand, will not agree with. And I know it's easy for me to say, let them go, instead of holding them for 3 years without letting them know what they're accused of. It's easy for me to say that this is a priority. It's easy for me to say that we should have put more resources toward this. It's easy for me to say that the Americans should have had more of a plan, right? Because I'm involved in this in a way as an American, but I'm also, what am I, 14, 13, something like that when this goes down? I feel like I'm looking at it from the outside, even though I'm inside the States. And it's only later as we grow up that we hear these and hear this and hear this, and then you start to become involved in political ideas, but then you grow up again and have your own life. You have to travel, you have to work, you have to study again. And you come back, and now I have the time to sit down and read and think and speak, or the will and the courage to the dedication to speak on things like this. But meanwhile, while I was doing all that, while I was being myself, all this activity was going on, and now I'm sort of reviewing it again, trying to understand what's going on. Another tells us that the Americans arrested him for having a fake ID and suspect he is a terrorist. But even Rahima agrees in the sectarian Iraq this is a common practice. No one wants to arrive at an extremist checkpoint having only a Sunni or a Shia document. One needs to be prepared to fake it if stopped by the other side. This happens later, where someone's Sunni or someone's Shia and they claim to be Sunni because it gets them a job. And I'm like, okay, so this is the land we're existing in. This is the place we are. This is, Protestant Catholics all over again. This is, let me have the right sort of ID so that these extremists who have guns at this point, or these people who are anti-Shia or anti-Sunni or who knows what, for what bloody reason, decide that my group or this group is bad. So I'm going to pretend to be this group or that group. So you have an entire land that exists filled with people who lie in order to survive, which is obviously a recipe for disaster. As then you get the Americans getting here and they're asking you questions and the guy lies and the Americans are like, oh my gosh, he lied. He must be hiding something. He must be a terrorist. He must be evil. And the guy who's lying just says, what do you mean? I'm lying. That's my way of life. That's what it takes to survive. If I didn't lie, I would have been shot at some checkpoint by another terrorist group. I don't really know the Americans. I don't really know English. I don't understand what's going on here. Another dude, the Americans. Okay, so someone is thinking of this. These comments. So she's thinking of this. I think I understand, but listen to the American response. These comments prompt me to tell General Gardner in a later briefing, I think we have a lot of prisoners with PTSD responses to the circumstances of their arrest and some of what has gone on during their imprisonment. For the moderates, we might want to figure out how to incorporate an explanation, perhaps even an apology of sorts for any mistreatment they have suffered. There's no sense sending them home angry with us over how they have been released here. The general points out that the soldiers in the field are in tough circumstances and often have hair-trigger violent reactions when they are arresting people who may be suicidal terrorists, but nods his agreement in finding a way to neutralize the prisoners' anger at the U.S. forces before releasing them. So, to what extent does this happen? It isn't talked about really, but somebody is thinking about these ideas. These ideas are percolating through the consciousness of the military and the State Department, the Americans at this time, which is interesting reading it. It's always interesting reading history like that when you go, oh, somebody had the right idea but they were ignored, or somebody had the right idea but it wasn't implemented well, or somebody was thinking of this or mentioning it but they weren't the person in charge, and we chose the wrong tact. Or at least it appears, or it feels as if we chose the wrong tact, where we chose the tact that I morally disagree with or intellectually disagree with, and you run into, counterfactuals. Well, if we had done this, then this wouldn't have happened. You don't really know. This is the frustration of doing anything in a system. You always have people doing their job and trying to do their part. And that runs up into someone else doing their job and trying to do their part. When I ask Karine again to see more of the hardcore detainees, she accompanies me to the prison and has a heated discussion with one of the military intelligence officers who is apparently controlling who I see and don't see. I don't think I meant to overhear his comments, but he basically tells her that if he gives me an interviews with the hardcore, he will have alerted them that he knows who they are and will thereby blow his covert surveillance of them. He doesn't want them to understand they are being observed and that there are informants. Karen insists he find a way to give me some more serious detainees to interview, but nothing really changes. I am frustrated. The whole point of my visit is to learn enough to create a treatment program of the hardcore and thus a situation where the military won't need to do as much surveillance. One of those interesting bits about an organization, or the military especially, I understand. You may be given a job to do, but that does not mean you were given the authority to do the job. Because you have to work with other people. Other people have to allow you to do something. You can't, that doesn't, just because you are told to do something doesn't mean you are in the line of command to order people to give you what you need to do your job. You got to work with what you're given. You got to work with what you can get. You got to work with what you can beg, borrow, or steal sometimes. And I imagine she goes to the general a few times asking for help, or a colonel, and they're like, well, we'll try to help you, but they got 1,000 other things to do. And of course, we're dealing with officers, people who are in charge. They want to ensure that they stay in charge. They want to be able to say to their superiors, I did this thing today. I am needed. I am important. There's another prisoner. I was taken to 3 different places after being beaten, he continues. The treatment there was worse and then it got better. It's very bad treatment here. I've told the Americans you are holding innocent people who have done nothing. Some have diabetes, high blood pressure, and other illnesses. Is this American democracy, human values? They give more rights to animals than us. Nad, how is the camp now? Does anyone hit you? He says no, but recalls his interrogation in the camp 2 years previously, which was not so nice. I've been here 2 years. I spent 7 months alone in the cell. It was light there sometimes. After 2 months, they gave me books to read. How do you cope in prison, I ask. I remember my life before, going to Pizza Hut and to fast food and driving my car around fast and having fun. How do you feel about Americans, I ask? I never hated Americans before. I saw them all the time in Saudi, their military, and Aramco. My hate is not towards the American people, but the government and what they did to me. It's because of the leaders. You know, it's a very difficult thing for a government to say, we are sorry, we did bad. I mean, look at Japan and how they keep going back and forth over, did we do terrible crimes in war, or were our war criminals heroes? Right? They just, the leaders in charge, the prime minister in charge, keep going, bouncing back and forth between we did bad, we did good, ding 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 ding. It's like always this revisionist history, one side or another, or the other side claims that they were doing revisionist history. The other side claims that they don't honor their dead, and just, I don't know. Again, it's easy for me to say that we should pay attention to the living and not the dead. You know, the history and what has happened in the war, these are all past. If you want me to say sorry for something America did in the 1950s, sure, go ahead. I'll get down on my knees and say I'm sorry. Why? Because the people who did that are dead. And I'm focused on today, on making sure that our children and grandchildren don't get involved in the same fighting. Don't care about what our stupid parents did. But again, that's easy for me to say because I'm sitting here safe in the States, in a garage in suburbia, having never experienced anything quite as terrible as being picked up and thrown in jail for 3 years, beaten, stuck in solitary, watching my country burn around me. How do you deal with this? How do you deal with your own pride? What do you find your own pride in? Is it personal? Is it communal? Do you think it is because of safety, or do you rely on history? I mean, look at the future. Do you have hope? What if, like, how many times do you trust the other side before they lie to you too much? And you'll never trust an American or an Iraqi or an Israeli or a Palestinian or a Russian again. It's like here in the States, how many times does someone have to hear a story about the police before they never trust a policeman ever again? You have to hear a story about some politician or about some right or left-wing radical before you're like, oh, okay, I'm putting people into a category and never looking at them again. So their color or political affiliation or where they come from or how much money they have, or whether they were a criminal at one point or not. Right? This is the problem of knowing people, who they are versus who they were versus who they will be. These are not the same necessarily. Okay, then she goes ahead and details problems she has with the people she's working with. Apparently, the military worked with they hired a contractor to do this program, and the contractor's she points it out, the contractor just wants money. The contractor has to work with the people who they get who are willing to come to Iraq and get shot at for money. And the people they're talking about that she's working with, as I sit down and begin writing, Jim keeps interrupting all of our work, telling adolescent sex jokes and filling us in with the details of his private life. He's an ex-Marine, but now plump, tends to pepper all his conversations with Alcoholics Anonymous one-liners and seems a bit incompetent. Jim sees himself as the boss, and while he needs me to design the program, he won't give me access to details I need to know to be able to do it well. For instance, when I tell him that I can begin recruiting psychologists, he won't share with me their pay scale. That's proprietary information, he informs me. You recruit them and then have them contact me. But how can I recruit someone out of an existing job in Jordan if I can't give them some idea of what we are paying? I ask. Jim holds firm. Rick is the same when it comes to detainee decisions. He seems to love the secret and intelligent aspects of the work, does not want to divulge how we're going to work with the prison authorities to select and sort detainees for our groups. But how can I be confident that I will have only hardcore believers in a group that I've designed to go over the extremist beliefs? I ask. I don't plan to introduce that in the moderates group. Rick stonewalls, telling me that it will be his decision with the prison authorities, and I begin to feel exasperated. Right? So, like, why? Look at these people. On the day Jim does set me up for interviews, he sends me with Dr. Tahir as my translator. Dr. Tahir's already admitted to me that he knows nothing about PTSD. And when he arrives, he is wearing a red baseball cap and reflector sunglasses, completely obscuring his face. You're coming dressed like that? I ask him. Yes, I'm Shia and these bastard terrorists are all Sunni, he states. I don't want any of them to recognize me. Dr. Tahir, I say, you can't come like that. You can't translate wearing mirror sunglasses. How in the world will they know if you're listening well or understand them if they can't see your eyes? But if they recognize me as dangerous to my extended family who still live here, he explains. Dr. Tahir relents and takes off his cap and sunglasses. Just don't tell them my name or that I'm Shia, he says. Right? So you have all the problems of the military bureaucracy, and that is mixed with the problems of just straight up corporate bureaucracy. A manager who doesn't want to work with you, doesn't want to tell you the pay scales. I mean, come on, you're in the middle of Iraq getting shot at, and pay scales are proprietary information? The military hires this guy, Jim, or whatnot, who is an ex-Marine, because they think that, he knows how to work with the military complex. And maybe he does, but it doesn't mean he's good for the program. It means he's good for the people the military that hires him. And the Dr. Speckard, the lady involved here, is writing the program, but not actually in charge of the whole thing. But she's the one who's like talking to generals and colonels. It sounds like a giant mess. Okay. And she puts the program together, writes it out. Right, then we have Jim saying, don't even ask me what I think about Islam. Then he mutters loud enough for us all to hear, some things are from the devil. I gasp, shocked that he could be working this program and say such a thing, but I have no time to respond as Susan chimes in with a sour tone. I don't see why we would want to work with anyone who has been an active member of Al-Qaeda. Because you're trying to convert extremists. And it turns out that someone who understands these extremists, who was a member of Al-Qaeda and has decided to leave the group, is probably able to convince other people to leave the group. If you just use a complete stranger, your chances of the program working go way down, and this hasn't even been discussed. This isn't even clear. She has these imams. These previous Al-Qaeda imams who she's met, that she has convinced the military to hire, the trio, she calls them, and she says, I ask where the trio is, and I'm told that they don't have badges yet and can't leave their tent, and even if they could, they're not allowed into the FOB. Great, they're freed from prison, but essentially on tent arrest. So even the people they've hired to work with them, they don't trust because of who they were. And I'm like, look, shoot, keep them together, assign them a guard. Is it a matter of resources? You just not have enough people to do the job? Is it a matter of no one knowing what's going on? Is it a matter of someone being in charge? Or is it a matter of conflicting lines of command? Like, I don't know what exactly the issue is, but you can see clear problems. And there's other problems just with the system itself. I ask everyone to introduce themselves by first names only because I know that there are concerns about security among all the participants. No one trusts the others not to leak their identity back out into Iraqi society, as their families can come under attack from the militants still on the outside. So you're fighting terrorism and it's embedded in the society. Someone might say something to someone else, to someone else, to someone else, and all of a sudden, because of an errant word, a brother or a sister or mother is being killed. Like the suspicion going on here. How do you break through the suspicion? You have to be open and honest and clear so that people can trust you even in an untrusting society, but that's difficult and hard and obviously horrifically dumb security. Because you're hoping that someone won't take advantage of you. Then the military hires the contractors the military hired to do this program hire. Okay. You know, Omar, Taha, Samir, Mahdi, they have master's degrees, some clinical experience, and they're all Shia. But all the prisoners in the compound are Sunni. And that's something I just don't get. I mean, how dumb is the understanding of Islam when I can tell you, look, you got Sunni and you got Shia and like they're like the Catholics and the Protestants. They don't get along on ideological basis, right? And then for you to go in, oh, well, they're Sunni, they're Shia. I don't know, they're Islamic. Just hire someone Islamic. I don't care where from. With that, I mean, do they have no background at all? That's the worry, right? As an American, I'm hearing this, and I hear the same story in many different ways. Americans went into Afghanistan and Iraq with no idea what they were doing, and no idea what the plan was, barely understanding the community they were getting involved with, having not enough, either not enough resources or not enough of an idea to direct them to do anything. You had infighting between the army and the State Department. In the military itself, you're dealing with the local constituency, the Iraqi police, prisoners, contractors. It's again, giant mess. And she's trying to deal with the program. She's like, well, this program that I'm working on, you see, is all about the psychology of de-radicalization, right? It's very important that you understand we don't work for the prison authorities and we have no interest in discovering the detainees' crimes. We're not here to collect information to help the interrogators or put anyone who is guilty permanently behind bars. Our goal is simple and limited to de-radicalization and rehabilitation. So even within the prison system itself, you have conflicting goals. The prison and the justice and the police and the military, right, have an interest in, oh, you are guilty. We want to find out what you did. We want to interrogate you and toss all the guilty people in jail and let the unguilty people go. And then she is trying to direct a program which is not concerned with guilt at all, but still runs through the prison. Right? You can see how you run into problems. I just want you to ask, see if you can get any information from them in the classes you run. Did someone mention that they did something? Well, we don't have a record of that. We better write it down. Before they go through your program and are de-radicalized, but before they are de-radicalized, we need to interview them at the prison to make sure that they aren't hiding something, and our techniques are completely different from yours. So you go through a de-radicalization program, and then you get interviewed by the prison, and who knows, maybe you get beat up. And you're going, oh, the Americans are hypocrites. Great. You can see how just trying to deal with a terrorist and non-terrorist is problematic. Right? I mean, and theoretically, with a military situation or a situation like an occupation of Iraq or Afghanistan, right? When you have 100,000 American troops in the country and it's American money supporting all this, then you can put one guy in charge of the system and he can work it out. He can give the orders. And then they delegate to someone else, to someone else, to someone else. And you have clear lines of command and control and directive. But you have to balance that. You have to make sure you put the right people in the right position at the right time. You have to rotate people between jobs, having them back to the States and then back to Iraq, and then back to the States and back to Iraq. You have to deal with promotions, all the regular corporate BS, except now people's lives are at stake, not just their money. Except now you aren't dealing with, low sales figures. You're dealing with people blowing themselves up in crowded marketplaces. The stakes are higher. The feelings are higher. You're dealing with people who are, she seems to say that a lot of people, the contractors who went to Iraq were escaping the problems in their regular life, right? Let me go to a dangerous place, it pays me a lot of money, so I don't have to be home. So I don't have to do something hard. Instead, I can go here and do something easy. Or I want to be involved in the military, or I want to be involved in secret spy stuff, or I want to be a petty tyrant. And I've talked with people who went over to Iraq and they were like, we thought we were going over to help people, right? They're 18 or they're 19, they're in the Marines or the Army. They head on over and they think, okay, we are going to help people. We're going to make things better. You get there and it's just a screw up after screw up. You see the problems. You're trying to walk through marketplaces and you're handing out candy, and then one day you can't do that because one of the kids blew themselves up and killed a comrade of yours, right? And it's the same thing. People who went to Vietnam. I was in Vietnam, and you'd have people. You'd meet these old guys once in a while, old American guys who were living in Vietnam or had come to visit Vietnam, and they'd say, "Oh, I was here during the war." I remember Da Nang before all these buildings were here. And they want to make their peace with the system, with what they did and what happened, and so on. It's a long, complicated process. Coming to terms. And then even just the definitions here. After our training, I go back to the office to work. Don't you think it's a mistake to trust people who wanted to kill us to work with them? Student asked me in a kneeling voice. You mean the trio? I ask, and she nods. Susan, I answer, they were studying Islam when we invaded their country. A lot of people were killed and we became the occupiers. From their point of view, they signed up to Al-Qaeda to defend their country and end the occupation. This isn't an occupation, Susan says blithely. I cannot really believe she just said it, but I stay calm. Susan, we invaded their country. We're sitting in a U.S. base in a foreign country. Look out the window. There are 10 U.S. military armored vehicles parked out there. This is most certainly an occupation. We got rid of Saddam for them. They wanted that, and they were happy we did it, she continues. They were sure celebrating when we tore down his statue. That's true. Most people were happy about that. Saddam was a terrible dictator, but Susan, they don't want us to stay and take control of their country, to set up bases, to put checkpoints all through their cities and towns, and to completely change its political balance and who controls which resources. But what happens if the Americans go into Iraq, blow it all up, and then leave after 6 weeks? We say, sorry, we came in, we blew up every single bridge in your entire country. We dismantled your government. We destroyed your military. We blew up all sorts of electricity transmission lines, and a bunch of sewers are broken. And there's no jobs. But we're going to leave now. Does Iraq become better? Does it not go through a terrorism? Or does it split up into a bunch of small successor states and warlords? Did we do better than we could have? Did we make things better? Did we make things worse? What if we had taken this choice? What if we had taken that choice? And again, I can stand here far away years later reading stories about something that happened when I was a kid and say, well, obviously we should have done this, or we should have done that, or this should have been the case, or that should have been the case. Or obviously this happened and that resulted in this and this and this, which was bad. So we should have done the other thing. That would have resulted in this and this and this, which was good. But I don't know that. I wasn't there on the ground. I don't have all the information. What I do think, though, is that someone who is going to be involved in a terrorist organization, or someone who is going to be in charge of these situations, probably has a very firm idea of the state of things. This happened. It's these people's fault, and so on and so on. Why? Because having a strong belief, having a strong center, a very clear understanding of the state and the case of events is a great help in acting. I tend to be anxious and second guess myself over and over and over again. So sometimes when I need to do something, it takes me quite a while to work up to that activity. And if I was more sure of myself and what I did and what I could do and what I wanted and what I should do, then I probably would have achieved many different things than I have. I don't think I would have quite the same understanding and mentality. I don't think I would be standing here in front of a camera talking inanely for hours, but I probably have a degree or a job or a family. I'd have something going for me, and I've started a business. I would have written a philosophy book instead of a poetry book. Instead, I'm a thinker. I'm a dreamer, not a doer. And then people are wanting to quit. They can't even get paper. At one point, she's working with the three imams, and they want to write up something for their program, their side of the program. They're like, we want to write up some religious advice, for the religious arguments you make, or the lines you pull out and talk to these prisoners about, and so on. We want to set up our system, have our guidelines, and to do that, they need access to a typewriter, to a computer and a printer. And they're running around for days, talking to generals, trying to get these people a printer. Here, we got Maddie. Taha is also Shia, but he is lying, saying he's Sunni when he is not. He changes his prayer to Sunni habits, but he forgets and reverts naturally to the Shia way of praying. We see him doing this. Why is he lying? We don't feel safe here. We don't want the detainees to be deceived and put in danger by them. Wathiq alerts me to other concerns. There have been threats made by the Shia staff, he admits. One of them says he waits for the release of the Sunni detainees when they are fully rehabilitated, and that the Mahdi army will kill them. External drives are a security issue, Rick says, looking up from his monitor. We are not allowed to give them to non-secure staff. You've got to be kidding, I say, again confronted with the bureaucratic style of these two. They want to write their program. They have computers already. What is a blank external drive going to do to threaten security here? I'm sure there are solutions, and are pencils and paper? A table to work at? You have them locked in their tent day and night. And there are reasonable things they're asking for, guys. There is no mention of desks in their contracts, Jim points out. I'm like, that concerns. Here's another bit. Can you give me the embassy number in Baghdad, I ask. I don't have it with me. I always call his mobile, but he's not answering me. I'm completely stupefied to hear they don't have the number to the U.S. Embassy, Baghdad. You must have a general number to the embassy, I ask. No. The staffer answers with blank looks. We never call there. What about a directory or an operator who can give us the number? No, the only directory we have is a military one, and there's no operator they call. Maybe you can Google it. One of the staffers suggests. Google it. How can I be in a headquarters, one of the best militaries in the world, and they don't have to reach their own ambassador in country, I think. Again, I'm an American, and this just makes me go, okay, I don't really feel safe hearing stories like that. They go back. She goes back inside and asks the FOB commander, the forward operating base commander, an admiral for help. Admiral doesn't know. Can't reach the ambassador in country. I'm like, oh gosh. So I mean, talking about terrorists and dealing with that, but this is just how do you run a system? Right, the relationship between then eventually she's fired. The contractor fires her, and she's trying to understand what goes on here. Right, the relationship between the contractor and the trio continues to be a major problem. I email Rick, but don't realize he has changed his email address, and my requests are never received. Then Ali writes on behalf of the trio saying they're totally fed up and are going to quit. I talk them down and then I write immediately to Colonel Cato, General Stone, and to the head of the contracting firm, still ignorant of the lanes that govern contract work with the military. General Stone responds immediately, of course, and the contractor is furious that I've alerted General Stone and Colonel Cato. The irony of the whole thing becomes even more clear when I learn that General Stone's phone call triggers Steve, the head contractor, to fly down to Camp Bucca and talk to the trio, who tell him they are not quitting, but only say this because I talked them into staying calm. Head contractor, even more angered by this, calls me while I'm at a business lunch and tells me currently we don't need your services anymore. I'm like, who's in charge? I don't know who's in charge here. It's not Colonel Cato. The contractors are under the control of, or under the command or the directive of someone else. She's talking with General Stone. And Colonel Cato, and they can't do anything, and there's this bureaucratic infighting within the military itself because of the money and the contractors, and it's... Okay, so she goes on later. In Iraq, I do not have continued access to our program to analyze its results directly, but Ken, Kafta, and most of the staff I had trained remained in place. And the trio were later modified into returning and rerunning what was named the Religious Enlightenment Program. They're part of our original design. The detainee rehabilitation program that I designed and written with the help of Surat Kapta and our team for the military was instituted in December 2007. Well over 10,000 detainees went through some version of the program. While the original intent had been for intensive Islamic challenge and psychological group interventions all day, daily for 6 weeks, alongside the military's educational programs in literacy, citizenship, and skills training to increase employment prospects after release. Because it was estimated that nearly 80% of the detainees were not ideologically committed to the militant jihadi ideology, most went through a very pared-down program, a 4-day program. I had and still have the burning question as I sat by my program churned out as I said, okay. I had and still have the burning question as I sat by, as my program churned out thousands of detainees for release. Did it work? And if not, why not? If so, what were the elements of success that could enhance a future effort? Nobody knows. For its part, the military tracked recidivism as its main marker of the various program success. By that standard, there was success. That does not necessarily mean the program worked, as one can imagine that a once-in-prison militant would know a lot more after being released to evade a further arrest. And in post-war, still poorly governed Iraq, released detainees that remain committed to militant jihadi violence could leave the country or lay low and hide, or return to their activities another day. Moreover, in terms of measuring any success from a program that was not applied uniformly across the entire detainee population, or well instituted with a well-trained, well-equipped staff, one must also give a great deal of credit to the greatly changing political situation occurring at the time in Iraq. And the economic situation as well. The fact that these massive detainee releases were happening at the same time as all these political changes raises the question: was the rehabilitation program responsible for returning the hearts of those released, or were the massive changes in the communal and tribal structure of society responsible for keeping them from joining al-Qaeda and related militant groups? And this is good news. One area in which the program certainly succeeded was where the military, under General Stone and Colonel Cato, clearly conveyed to the detainees what was required for them for release, including an appearance before the Multinational Forces Reconciliation Committee board where their incarceration crimes would be discussed. For detainees who on average spent 330 days incarcerated, this sense of having some control and predictability over their futures, rather than what the Palestinians called open check prisoners, was likely heartening. A constant issue that plagued the prison staff is that the military could not clearly identify who among their prisoners were the militant jihadi ideologies and recruiters, and who also was becoming radicalized inside the prison. In February 2009, I go to Amman, Jordan, to interview among the Iraqi diaspora and met some foreigner detainees who had gone through the program. They were not very supportive of the program. They didn't think it worked very well. However, here, my greatest shock, however, came from the aftermath of the trio's involvement. Two of them died. Someone somehow learned of their involvement, and when the program disbanded and the trio returned to their homes in Baghdad, Mahmoud was targeted and killed by al-Qaeda. Wafiq and Ali found their greatest troubles coming from the Shia-dominated government of Iraq, who did not easily forgive them the former al-Qaeda activities, despite the fact that they had risked their lives working to fight extremism in Iraq and their prisons for the past year. Both were arrested and treated harshly in Iraqi prisons. Ali was released, but Wafiq remains in Iraqi prison to this day. This reminds me of the stories you heard about the American military disengaging from Afghanistan and how people got left behind. How translators that worked with us, worked with the Americans, were left behind. And their families were left behind because we didn't have a good enough plan for getting them all out. We were running around like smashing control panels in helicopters because we didn't have an evacuation plan. And I know, crying and whining about this is partially just the same old that's been going on for 5,000 years. Oh, look at how incompetent the bureaucracy is. Look how messed up the command lines are. Look how nobody planned for this. I mean, you can read, straight up hieroglyphics written on papyrus, or words stamped into dried Babylonian clay, where someone complains to a overlord, we didn't have enough water for the crops. There will be no crops this year. I warned you there will be no crops this year. So when there are no crops, don't come blaming me. It is all your fault. Yeah, I warned you that we didn't have enough irrigation. I warned you that we planted the wrong seeds, and the people in charge didn't listen to me. And as the person in charge, how often, I mean, you can look at, I've been reading Marcus Aurelius, right? And in his time period, he's the emperor in charge. He has straight up 100% the absolute power of life and death over every single soul in the entire empire. And there are still people killing his kids. There are still people raising the specter of rebellion. You know, how many of us have had a boss where we go, look, the CEO is fine, the vice president is fine, ding, 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 my direct boss is fine, and then there's someone in the middle that's just screwing it all up. I mean, I've been in charge and gone, okay, this is one guy that just isn't quite ready or willing to do the job he's supposed to do, and okay, did I give her too much to do? Do I need to treat her in a special way, right? Like some people you can tell what to do, other people you have to baby along. Some people need to know why they're doing it. Others just want to know the job, the rule. Some people you can entice with accolades. Some people need money in order to work harder. You know, am I being open enough? Can they tell me what's wrong? Is there good communication, or am I in the middle of some bureaucratic infighting and there's 4 different departments trying to make this person do something? It's all over the place. But we'll try and leave that behind for this last section here. I've been complaining about the Americans and the military and how that just engenders more terrorism and problems. And what she's trying to get out here in the book is that you need to change the situation, the political situation and the mental situation of these individuals. It's not about, or at least her way of looking at things is that it's not about the religion. It's about giving folk pride in themselves. It's about healing psychological wounds. It's about giving them hope that they can change the world without resorting to violence. Which, of course, means that the people who have the military and the guns and the nukes refrain from violence too in certain situations. Okay. So talks here. John Horgan and others have argued that de-radicalization is not a realistic goal in most cases, that disengagement is. Certainly, it's true that disengagement rather than de-radicalization is a more likely outcome when no intervention takes place and natural forces are at work. Indeed, many terrorists spontaneously disengage from terrorism for many reasons: burnout, fear of arrest, disenchantment, competing desires and responsibilities, age, disinterest, and so on. But many of these remain ideologically committed. They do not relinquish their extremist views and may continue to harbor beliefs that in certain circumstances terrorism is absolutely morally justified. I mean, how many people are there in the world who say, well, I feel that this movement or this idea is good, but I'm old or I'm tired or I have to work or I've done my part or I'm injured or I'm sick or I live in the middle of nowhere and can't go to these protests. But what I can do is give money. What I can do is post on social media. What I can do is speak to a camera. And that's something we feel in I want to say the first world. But the same exact situation takes place all over the planet. Maybe you aren't involved in terrorism yourself, but your brother is. Are you willing to hide your brother? Are you willing to send him money? Are you willing to lie to someone? Are you willing to pass messages along? Are you willing to just not tell someone when he begins to express the desire to blow himself up? You may not agree with a terrorist organization, but does that mean you'll stand in their way? Does that mean you'll say anything when they are talking out loud? Are you too afraid to speak? Are you secretly for them, but you have other interests? Right? It's the same issue over and over and over again. I'm trying to illustrate it here is that we try to look at, we are encouraged to look at terrorists and people who choose violence and war and death as extremely evil and different. But the same people who, as teenagers or adults, choose terrorism were also kids, just like we were kids. You know, there are people involved in terrorism in the Middle East who are my age, I'm sure, that during the invasion of Iraq and Afghanistan by the Americans, or during the troubles between Chechnya and Russia, or during who knows what in the Sahel, or during the Palestinian-Israeli issue, didn't really understand what was going on, and just grew up in a nice, pretty normal life for their area and time and circumstances, with family and friends and school, and then something happened. No one is born a terrorist. No one is born an American. You become one. No one is born no one is born an Israeli or a Brit or a Frenchie or an Afghani or an Indian or a Chinese or a Colombian or an Argentinian. You become one. You begin to identify with that country, with the people, with the history. You begin to feel that you have a family and a connection and a place in the world. And some of those places are safe. Some of them lead you to very unsafe roads. Some of them lead you to nonviolence, believing that works and that it can work and that it should work and that we can change the world this way. Sometimes you go down another road and think that violence is how the world works, is how power is activated and used, is how one feels that they are important and valid, is how one deals with heartache or stress or despair. No person is really that different than another, for the most part, right? Like there are people that have psychological issues, right? They end up with schizophrenia, or they are narcissists, or they are running around with split personalities. They are sociopaths or don't have emotions or don't have empathy, right? But these are a very small minority of people. And even they aren't going to, it's not like every sociopath becomes a mass murderer. It's just something which is a mark of danger. And it's the same for a lot of Islamic terrorists. The mark of danger is where they grew up. The mark of danger is the messages around. The mark of danger is the trauma that is inflicted upon them. The mark of danger is the political system and what freedoms are available to them in that way. What the mark of danger is how much hope they have. The mark of danger is if they are captured by an ideology. The mark of danger is who influences them. The mark of danger is if you kick the Russians out of Afghanistan and you spent 20 years fighting, how do you transition out of fighting? Do you find some other cause for it? Do you push your ideology more and more and more? And none of these are going to make you be a terrorist, but it's going to make it more likely you choose such a route. And so to defeat terrorism, it seems to me, you don't pick one danger side and stop it and say, that's how we stop all of it. No, you push on all these bits. You reduce psychic pain, you increase intellectual freedoms, you increase social freedoms, you allow people to find pride in their history, you listen to what people want, you make them believe they can change the world, you preach a tolerance, you get people to become tolerant so that they aren't so engaged and enraged, you promote self-rule. So that instead of tribe versus tribe and killing, they grow to be able to talk with each other in order to govern the country. You work on these habits, as Aristotle would suggest, for years and years and years, and hopefully you change it in some small way. You don't get rid of terrorism. You're never going to get rid of terrorism as a movement, as a possibility, but you can reduce the likelihood. And it's hard to come to terms with. We can't control the world. We aren't God. We can just push it in certain directions. We can give it a little nudge. We can nudge fate with our elbows once in a while, because we have free will and the ability to both cry and smile. Right? Certainly not all terrorists would de-radicalize. Some will only disengage and some will never do either. And for that latter group, we need military and police interventions. But for the former, we need understanding of the reasons and means by which individuals become terrorists. And comprehending the lethal cocktail of terrorism consists of the interaction of four things: a terrorist group, vulnerable individuals, social support, and a terrorist ideology. Makes it easier to come to solutions for how to prevent engagement and disengagement in terrorism. So long as groups struggle politically, those who turn to terrorism to try to violently force their solutions will likely always exist. Terrorism as a tactic is just too enticing for those who judge violence as the most useful way to press towards their political goals. So we need to become savvy enough to engage those who might move to endorse terrorism to become and stay engaged in the normal political process. And in some cases, that requires real changes on our part. Cleaning up corruption, addressing real and perceived grievances, or sharing territory, resources, and power in equitable ways that the groups who may feel or actually are disenfranchised. Just as crime is a fact of life, there's probably no end to terrorism, just good, multi-level, and well-thought interventions that contain and reduce it. She goes on for, terrorism tends to be Islamic. Or Islamic terrorism is a real ideology right now. And partially this has to do with groups that exist in the religion. Partially it has to do with the history of the land. Right? As I understand it, like anti-American terrorism is less likely to happen among Muslims in America, or Muslims in Europe, or Muslims in Indonesia, but Muslims in Middle East, you have this higher likelihood I mean, you're talking about 1 out of 10 million as opposed to 3 out of 10 million, but it exists, as far as I know. And that has to do with the history more than anything else. The colonial and interventionist history. But they'd be there without us too. Right? The terrorists that I studied were not insane killers. Instead, they were rational actors considering their choices within the context of their religious beliefs. But many, especially inside conflict zones, while not insane, were certainly psychologically disturbed, especially by psychological trauma and bereavement. Fugitives and prisoners who are tortured or harshly treated and then volunteer for suicide missions also make it clear that if they want to turn the tide on populations who endorse these methods, we may have to consider offering amnesties and remember that getting caught is deemed far worse than exploding oneself. Terrorist instigators' ideology and charismatic leaders are also important ingredients of the terrorist mix. I found repeatedly that dramatically presented video and audio clips of traumatic images, paired with Islamic verses and songs, can incite a religious fury and sense of duty to fight for the downtrodden. This book concentrates on interviews outside of the country, and its content is also relevant to the militant jihadis who have been active inside the U.S., as their methods of recruitment, motivations, terrorist trajectories, and ideologies are the same. Often over the years, as I presented my findings at conferences, I was asked if we don't yet in the U.S. see suicide terrorism. At the time I was being asked, I pointed out that our Muslim immigrant populations are much more resistant to the militant jihadi ideology because they, for the most part, arrived in the US with good educations and significant means, and they are not blocked from advancing but rather thrive here following the American dream. Their counterparts in Europe, however, are more vulnerable to the militant jihadi groups and ideology because many arrive poor and illiterate, were recruited to manual labor jobs, and often find themselves rejected from easily entering mainstream society, leaving them, and especially their children born in Europe, alienated, marginalized, angry, and open to fighting against the society they live under. Right. In all cases, dealing with terrorism requires addressing their context. If they are feeling marginalized, disenfranchised, hopeless, sensitive to the pain of others, and identify with that pain and feel pain themselves, we may have to address what hurts to make them more resistant to terrorist groups and ideologies. This may mean coming to political stances where we do not support corrupt regimes or dictators and reducing our military footprint. Making sure military misdeeds do not occur, and when they do, they are swiftly and publicly addressed. It may also require carefully crafted social programs and bringing these programs to where they are needed, the street, prisons, community centers, troubled neighborhoods, the internet, and so on. Likewise, we need to catch and block the recruiters, those working in person in troubled communities, targeting troubled individuals, working in prisons and over the internet, and that also requires good surveillance and policing as well as clever psychological prevention and countering methods. So he's pointing out at the end here is that you can take the terrorists she is looking at and place them in 3 groups in decreasing order of size. The first group is going to be basically traumatized kids or traumatized people who have suffered because of a political situation. they've been thrown in jail, or they've been in prison, or there's bombs going off, or there's economic malaise and they blame the Americans. Whatever the case, or the Russians, or they saw something terrible happen when they were a kid, and so on and so on. These are the ones who might choose suicide terrorism. These are the ones who will support terrorists. These are the ones who repeat these ideas. These are the ones from whom the next group is drawn from. The next group, next smaller group, would be those who become terrorists actively because they are seeking a political change, or because they are vulnerable to a social or religious ideology which says they can hurt the aggressor. They're allowed to be in pain. They're allowed to suffer. They are allowed to strike back. They're allowed violence. And to deal with that second group, you need to show them and convince them that they don't have to be violent, they don't have to choose terrorism in order to change the political situation. You have to negotiate with them, not as terrorists, not as the means by which they achieve their goals, but as a political group who is trying to achieve those goals. How do you wean them away from terrorism and make them just another political group instead of a violent extremist group? As well, you have to deal with the religious problems and the psychological problems that these people are going to have. You need to convince them that their book does not endorse violence in such a way. You have to show them that there are other ways to interpret, so that there are other sects and ideas, that there are deeper spiritual issues with religion than the technicalities of a book and how a word like jihad is interpreted. You have to, as well, allow, I guess, like forgiveness, I suppose, is a close word to it. Or if not forgiveness, at least a respect is allowed to them. Like, someone who is a violent, jihadi, killer, murderer person is also going to be, in Afghanistan, the person who is living in a cave 7 months out of the year, spending 3 nights sneaking in to plant an IED, risking their lives. And they're doing it in a horrible fashion for horrible means that we disagree with, and they're killing our people and our brothers and our friends. But these aren't cowards. And when we vilify them and call them evil, we are inspired to say, well, terrorism is cowardice. And no, it's not. It's a suicidal activity, I would argue, psychologically suicidal for sure, based on how she talks about it. But it is an attempt to live. There's a bravery that even the most horrible person can have if they're willing to risk themselves. And you have to acknowledge that. But not only that, you have to get them to acknowledge it themselves. Saying, I did bad things. That doesn't mean I'm a bad person. I can change. I can do better. And then the third group is going to be the ones who are the fanatics. The ones who are the recruiters. Some person going into England, in London, acting as a middle school teacher and grabbing kids, putting these ideologies into them, where they are allowed to kill and destroy, where they have to be Islamic, where all of society is against them, where they need to join a gang in order to be respected, where they should, slash and cut the faces of those who don't agree with their religion, where they should embrace crime and destruction and murder. Like, these are not good people. And I think there's an extreme difference, it appears to me, between someone who is sitting in Afghanistan or Iraq or Palestine and waving a gun around, fighting in their country, doing things, right? Or someone who is in Chechnya or the Sahel or Yemen and fighting even with IEDs and terrorism in their own country, or in an area where they are able to identify religiously or ethnically or sociologically or politically with people around them fighting. And that is entirely separate than someone who lives in the US or Britain or Paris and has a nice normal life themselves, right? Who themselves particularly does not suffer from this ongoing psychic pain of existence in Palestine, for example. Someone who intentionally targets vulnerable youth, someone who is misinterpreting religious texts for their own reasons, someone who knows exactly what it is like to live in a country that is more or less religiously and ethnically tolerant, and then despises all that anyway, right? These folk who come in and try to destroy or kill a society in which they live and benefit, right? Using the trust that the society of America or the First World or Japan or China has in themselves, and using it and trying to pervade it, trying to what's the word? Infect it like a disease. They're trying to become the devil in that tree of good and evil. They're saying, look, I'm going to make you do a bad thing. I'm going to tempt you, and I'm not only going to tempt you by offering you the opportunity, I'm going to push you. I'm going to worm my way into the ears of your children and set them on the path of destruction, revenge, and suicide. Like, those are bad. It's one thing to fight for your country or people, or to go and fight against soldiers. That's one thing. It's another thing entirely to corrupt the youth. And the other side of that third small group, I would say, are people who just become addicted to the violence. People who are using terrorism and their religion as an excuse for taking control or for torturing people, as an excuse, just as we see in all sorts of cultish religious figures in the States, for taking control of folks' lives, for hurting people because they can, for becoming so involved in terrorist activities that they don't know how to escape. They don't know how to live a regular life unless they're fighting somebody. And these are also dangerous. I think one of the reasons that terrorism as a movement spread is because you had the Russians invade Afghanistan. This is referenced in the book, right? But the Russians invaded Afghanistan. The Americans gave the Afghanis weapons and training and resisting the Russians, and this turned into a terrorist activity, essentially. Then the Russians lost, the Soviet Union fell, the US is in charge, and you had a bunch of terrorists who had been fighting for 20 years against the Russians. And now they won. And what do you do with them? Now what do you do? You've been a career soldier. Do you retire? Can you retire? Some people can. And some people can't. And how do you reach them? How do you reach these radicals? You have to not only capture them and imprison them. You have to actually change their entire way of life. It's not just about undoing some psychological trauma or shifting them to a different political tract. It's about changing how conflict itself is resolved or resolvable between groups. It takes a lot of effort to convince someone that you don't have to punch the bully, you can talk it out. Because sometimes you can't. And that's something which, as an American growing up in school, especially as an American boy growing up in school who got bullied a lot, sometimes you have to fight back. Sometimes you have to punch the bully in their face. And all the talking in the world won't convince them to stop. Now, in my experiences, you stand up to the bully and they get the bloody nose, you get the bloody nose, you will get suspended, you come back and there's a sort of truce. There's an understanding that the bullying can only go so far. There's an understanding that there is a pride to be met in each person. And I think every little kid who gets involved in a fight like this then is told that fighting is bad and terrible and you shouldn't ever fight ever because it's nonviolence all the way, internalizes that message in a little bit as a condemnation of the very concept of violence. When we know violence is something that happens. Violence is a means of conflict resolution that has existed for the entirety of the history of life itself. You go back to protozoa, billions of years ago, and you're going to find some sort of violence. It is the way of things. But as we evolve, you form multicellular creatures that work together. As we evolve, we become dinosaurs and squirrels and human beings. As we evolve, we form, instead of individual people, we are now a family, a tribe, a country, a region, a religion, a philosophy, an idea, a world. And when that happens, we can be subsumed into these greater identities. So, the question of terrorism isn't just how do we deal with terrorists, it's how do we deal with political changes? How do we deal with individuals and individual people and movements who disagree with each other? How do we not only, respect literally everyone, but how do we not demonize folk? It goes back to that book on racism again, right? You have to allow people to defend themselves. You have to allow space for movement and change. There is a common misunderstanding in the way the world works. We say that the Earth orbits around the sun, and that is not true. The Earth and the sun both orbit around their center of gravity. This is a small but important distinction because I feel it harkens back to how we as human beings live as well. We're not all centered around a religion or the ideology or a country or anything like that. We have a balance to be met and matched. There is a way of life we have been trending towards for a long time, and we're not there yet, and we may never reach, where terrorism is not needed to meet our goals, where violence isn't needed to meet our goals at all. But for now, we aren't there yet. So we punch each other and then we punch back. We blow places up and then we put people in jail and we shoot somebody. And then there's terrorism here and terrorism there. And a soldier dies, a civilian dies, back and forth. Hopefully, we can change in some way. But in order to do so, it's going to take the work of many, many days. And that's my thoughts on this book. I'll move on. It's interesting, right? Especially, again, because I'm an American growing up and I hear about terrorism all the time. It has pervaded my life from an early age, from 9/11 till today. It's something we hear about all the time. And we are only beginning to really reflect upon the American involvement in the Middle East, which is still continuing today, and trying to understand it in a more correct and honest way.